My traumatized babies and mentally ill Barbies, the dawn is breaking on the stage that holds our final destiny. And so, my traumatized babies and mentally ill Barbies, the show must go on. And on today's episode, I'm sorry again. I look like I'm filming it on the same day. I look like a weird little priest, but I'm bundled up because we are currently, most of America anyway, Arctic blasting. And despite having the heater on and despite it being like above freezing right now, it is still very chilly in here. So please forgive my kind of like weirdo look today. Not that I don't look like a feral goblin most of the time on the channel anyway, but today is like especially so. And this is going to be the first part of the discussion or breakdown research on the first yellow transmission. And a lot actually happened in between then and now. And the biggest thing that I did, like really the bulk of like investigation or deconstruction that I did work on was I mentioned in that first transmission that the secret cipher of the Euphonauts was likely relevant. And as it so happened, coincidentally, I had received a copy of the complete secret cipher of the Euphonauts for Christmas. So I was like, well, I might as well go ahead and give this a read. And this complete secret cipher of the Euphonauts also includes, I believe the title is The Secret Rituals of the Men in Black. So these were originally 2 books, and now this complete version is, well, it's not complete anymore. Like this is kind of an omnibus of those 2 books, but fairly recently, Alan Greenfield released the 3rd book, I guess, in this trilogy, which is all about, I'm saying what he is calling, but it's been historically referred to within certain occult circles as the Black Brotherhood or the Black Lodge. And I'm not getting in too much into that in this particular discussion. But what I have here is the book, and I also have a bunch of notes that I'm going to be referring to, so sorry about that. I prefer to like speak mostly just off the top of my head, but I'm trying to stay at least some sort of organized. Okay, so let's talk about, if you have never heard of this book or anything that it entails, I'm going to give you kind of a brief overview of what this is about and also how I came into contact with it. Initially, because a few years ago now, a number of years ago, I got involved with a particular magical operation. It was the only time in my life when I was actively working with other occultists and magicians internationally. They were from all around the world. And we were collectively working on an ultra-terrestrial hunt. And part of that hunt, the reason why it was going on was because at the time, a show, I guess it's a reality paranormal-ish show called Hellier was really big. And if you've never watched both seasons of Hellier, and you don't mind more of like the spooky, weird vibes, I would definitely suggest that you watch both seasons of Hellier. I like the show. There are like 2 really big things about that show that actually infuriated me. There were 2 major things that the Newkirks did that I felt were extremely unethical. And I don't know if anyone ever really like seriously talked to them about it, or if they ever seriously had a discussion about it. One of the things I did see them get into a discussion about, which was by the end of the show, they performed a ritual that was intended to release the great god Pan. They just took that upon themselves without asking anybody else. And the thing is, what irritated me about this was that there were certain, after the show blew up and everything, we were in the midst of the Panini, of course. And so people were asking them at the time, do you think that the ritual that you did, releasing the great god Pan, which is essentially like a being of like largely chaos, right? Do you think that that had anything to do with the Panini? Now, my personal opinion is that there is no one person who would be responsible for the manifestation of the Panini. That was a lot of things going on. So no, I do not believe the Newkirks are directly responsible. However, this was all like poo-pooed and laughed at and dismissed and like, of course not. Like, why would blah, blah, blah. And the thing is, I believe that that is a pansy-ass response. Is magic real or is it not real? I actually don't think it is ridiculous when someone claims that they are releasing the great god Pan for everybody else, no questions asked. They did that magic ritual and they released it onto the internet, for one thing. I don't think that it's ridiculous to then say, hey, this ritual was potentially successful and here is a potential result. What do you have to say about that ethically? What responsibility or accountability are you taking for that? That was sort of just like shoved off, and everybody who was like kind of questioning them about it was sort of soundly mocked by the community, or like, that's ridiculous, why would you ever think that? I think it's a valid question. And it irritated me extremely to hear somebody say like, well, of course that's not what happened. Of course that's not the result. Like, it's not going to do, well, why wouldn't it have done that? If you had a very large, successful ritual for releasing the great god Pan, why wouldn't that have been a result? So to me, I get very angry at magicians doing magic, and then when a massive result happens that is potentially tied to that, they want to backpedal. So again, I'm going to get off of this point, but if anyone expects like what the synchronicity was the golden Magonia. If what I'm referring to as like the golden age Magonia, that sync that came out in the first transmission, if that does indeed refer to like an ascendancy of magic or a new golden age of magic, or the potentiality that magic is taken seriously within consensus reality, that's the sort of conversation we would need to have. And so when magicians do magic and then go like, oh, well, no, like it's not really real, like it's, stand in it or don't, like that really irritated. And there was one other big ethical thing that incensed me when I saw it, but I'm not getting into it. Regardless of what I think about that and their response to it, I think Hellier is a great show. And I think that it is worth a watch. And I do hope that maybe one day they create a third season. I'm not sure. But this book was featured in the show because of a character in the book, and that also supposedly contacted the Newkirks on the show. The character's name is Terry Wrist, and in this book it is Terry R. Wrist, which like it's discussed on the show that this is probably like, I don't know, a pun because it's like terrorist, okay? And it was suspected by one of the magicians that I was working with that Terry Wrist was potentially some sort of ultra-terrestrial that potentially was in contact with Alan Greenfield. And so the operation was designed to potentially get in touch with this ultra-terrestrial. And that particular operation helped me a lot with sorting through my personal history and familial history with alien abduction and stuff like that. And unfortunately, the operation, what I thought at the time, ended before it could ever become successful. I'm not sure that that's the case anymore. I do think that there was some sort of success with the operation as a whole. And likely, if so, then the other people who were involved in that operation would likely have some understanding of that too. But so this book, what this book is about, its premise is that most of Western occult practice throughout history has been largely about contact between human beings and ultra-terrestrials. That's what like the bulk of occult ritual is about. getting contact from ultra-terrestrials and them transmitting certain technologies to us in the form of what we're referring to as magic. But it's not really magic at all. It's just potentially highly advanced technology. Okay, so within the secret cipher of the Euphonauts, what Alan Greenfield is positing is that all communication, like when we have someone who's been claiming to be in contact with aliens and the aliens have told them something, a lot of that contactee lingo, like you'll notice there's a lot of like weird names in it, like Indrid Cold and Ashtar, and just like if you go through like a lot of the trance channeling stuff, especially, you get weird names or like mythical names or biblical names like Abraham, okay, or Seth, things like that. Seth, Set, you know, it's stuff like that. And so what people picked up on was that potentially these names and the things that these beings are talking about, it's not a literal thing that they're talking about. The names that they're giving and locations and messages are actually code. So a being can tell you something like a simple sentence, say, Indrid Cold is at the center of the mountain. That phrase does not literally mean Indrid Cold is at the center of the mountain. That phrase is code for something else. And the conceit of Secret Cipher of the Euphonauts is that there was a code that was embedded into Aleister Crowley's The Book of the Law. And it does mention that. The Book of the Law says that there's like some secret code in it. And it also mentions, or like it was mentioned, taken down, recorded, that Crowley himself would not crack this code, but someone after him would crack it. And then like 70 years later, there was a code that was taken from the Book of the Law, and now I believe you can still access it online. And so what Alan Greenfield is talking about in this book is that he and other people, other magicians, other occultists, those like really concerned with Crowley for the most part, were taking contactee information like alien names, messages, locations. They were taking certain words that sounded odd to them, and they would run it through this decoder that they created, a program on the internet, and then those words would return other references like within the Book of the Law and other stuff. So using the supposed ultra-terrestrial messages, they ran these through a computer program, and they would then be able to predict like the type of contact that would follow the initial contact that had gone down with that particular contactee, or they would be able to predict other locations for eventual contact. But this book is maintaining that like the master code was given within the Book of the Law by Aleister Crowley, even though Alan Greenfield acknowledges that generally there have been like other codes throughout history, and sort of the code itself has a lifespan. And then eventually all of these codes kind of die out, and then a new code is introduced. And so then ultra-terrestrials. What is an ultra-terrestrial? He seems to lump these together with like angels and everything else included. That is not what I consider an ultra-terrestrial. The term ultra-terrestrial, I believe, was coined by John Keel. And to my mind, an ultra-terrestrial is a being not bound by dimension, timeline, or space-time. And so what I mean by that is like most beings, like beings of the earth, angels, demons, or all of that, that's on the plan, right? The cross is a symbol of a type of energetic order for the world that we expect to experience. And most beings either fall directly on that cross, or they are in like one of the quadrants, right? Close to the cross still. That's all technically close to or on the plan. Ultra-terrestrials, in my opinion, are off the plan. They're off the plan. They do not operate by any of the same rules that we really understand. And it seems like there are ultra-terrestrials that always just were, like they just came into being as ultra-terrestrials, but then potentially there are also other beings, human beings or other beings, that can kind of evolve into that status. Now, those beings, or like it's typically like human beings, I think it can be others as well. The human beings that have like evolved far enough that they're actually kind of no longer really human beings. They're like, they don't even have to occupy like 3 dimensions. They're kind of like, it's not that they're discarnate or whatever, but it's like they're so far advanced that they might as well not be humans anymore. These beings are being referred to as like the third order, the secret chiefs, the Great White Brotherhood. That sounds like the KKK. It's not. So there's the Great White Brotherhood, or the White Lodge, and then the Black Brotherhood, or the Black Lodge. So the difference between the White Lodge and the Black Lodge, and the beings who operate within them, these are like the third order, are like the like humans and other beings that are like in-betweenies, right? They're not quite human, but they're not ultra-terrestrials either. But there are also like ultra-terrestrials associated supposedly with each lodge, right? The difference between people in the White Lodge and the Black Lodge, because that doesn't mean like there are right-hand path and left-hand path like magicians or whatever in the White Lodge, and there are right-hand path and left-hand path magicians in the Black Lodge. So that does not mean like it's a split between the right hand and the left hand path. It's not. The difference between the white and the black is that the white is like pro-evolution, pro-liberation, freedom, and all of that for all of humanity and all of the other beings, etc. The Black Lodge is pro like slave mentality. They don't want anybody being empowered or anything like that. They want to keep people and the rest of the beings under control. And there is some mention of that in this book, but in his newest book, Alan Greenfield is mentioning, like naming names of people like historically and potentially contemporarily, I don't know, who would be in the Black Lodge. Something that Greenfield is very attached to in this book, and it seems like even now, is that these beings or ultra-terrestrials or whoever are speaking in an intentional code, that the messages are coming out like they are because they are really only meant to be understood by those who will be initiated into some sort of magical order or something like it, or those who have the capability to do so. And that we have to decode these messages as part of like a large scale initiatory process that is somehow integral to human evolution. And here's the thing. I agree that communication between beings, whether you're calling them ultra-terrestrials or it's another being entirely, I do believe that that tends to be very symbolic, and yes, it tends to be like metaphorical or coded. But I disagree that this is intentional. Potentially it is. I don't think so though. I just think that there's a significant language barrier that is there, partially because these are non-human beings, and also due to intentional sabotage that went on in our deep history, like as a species. We didn't used to have these communication barriers, in my opinion. At one time, I believe, and this is like in the deep, like before recorded, or at least the recorded history that we have, right? Because we have no idea what went down in deep time. We could have had plenty of recorded history, like written down, or like extreme technology and all that stuff that was lost due to a dark age. Like we could have gone through something like a nuclear winter and lost all of that. And now this is like the life that we had after that nuclear winter. We're building up again. We don't know. But I believe at one time there were a lot of different beings besides human beings, all operating in materiality on one dimension. So Greenfield is also really attached to the idea that all of these transmissions are best decoded through the cipher that was gleaned from Crowley's work. And I disagree, but unfortunately, because I don't really care for Crowley at all, I would love to be able to just like disregard him mostly entirely. Unfortunately, can't do that because his work in magic is very significant, especially to this issue. And it doesn't matter what I like and don't like. If it's significant, then I've got to talk about it. And I also posted an interview from, at this point, a couple of months back with Greenfield that he gave on the Sitting Now podcast about his, at this point, still fairly recent release about the Black Lodge. And in that interview, he's talking about the White and Black Lodges, and I did not know this. I was watching the interview and I was like, what? Like, this is why, like, unfortunately, Crowley's significant and I gotta figure it out. Well, I know some of it. I know why, some of why now, but like, I gotta find out what he said about this particular topic specifically. Greenfield brings up in his conversation about the White and Black Lodges that Crowley mentioned a Yellow Lodge. And in that interview, Greenfield essentially blows this off and he was just like, yeah, Crowley was kind of a crackhead. And so I think he doesn't know what he's talking about in this instance. For me, I think he was onto something, obviously, or at least we're talking about some of the same stuff. Yeah, from my point of view, the fact that he's talking about the existence of a Yellow Lodge is very relevant to what I'm calling the yellow transmissions that are potentially coming from the Yellow Star, from the Yellow Jack. That being is probably associated with whatever the Yellow Lodge is. So we're talking about something that is neither technically on the White Lodge or the Black Lodge, though I would say to you from what I know about the particular thing that this being is here to do, that the White and Black Lodges, or at least some of the beings associated with those energies, currents, whatever, are involved with this. But it's like all of them together, like both the White and the Black Lodge, or at least the Black, like, because that's just like, how could like the Black Lodge be relevant to what we're, like, it just is that, at its heart, even though we're saying the Black Lodge is against human evolution, in their more positive aspects, they are energies of order. But it is order and control that is pushed to like the extreme negative. But in general, in order to create what we would intend to be ultimately a positive change for the world or like the multiverses, whatever, we can't just have chaos. We do need order, but it's got to be appropriately placed and in the appropriate way. So before I go on with more about what I uncovered as I read through the complete secret cipher of the Euphonauts, at least at this stage of this exploration with the information. Before I get into more of that, I want to address concerns that someone brought up with the Yellow Jack, at least. Someone, and I don't remember the person's name, but they commented, I believe on one of the community posts, they had said that their guides had warned them about this being because this being can cause harmful change. And I wanted to validate that person. That is absolutely correct. However, it is not technically the Yellow Jack that is causing harmful change. That's not the purpose of the Yellow Jack, nor of the operation that they initiate. The reason why, historically, we've gotten nothing but harmful change I'm saying working with this being, I don't know that anyone was aware, or if they were aware, they were talking about it a lot differently at the time. I don't know that anybody who was working with the Yellow Jack, at least in our most recent history, was aware that they were, or of what was actually going on, in my opinion. The way that the Yellow Jack operates when they're working with the person, and even on an individual level, because the Yellow Jack works with people individually, and then there's like this large thing, like there's stuff that the Yellow Jack will do on a microcosm with like individual people, and then there's this macrocosmic thing that I don't understand how that selection process works, or how that large of an operation would work. I assume that more of that is going to come as we go, but I don't know how much in control any one of us is with that macrocosmic process. But the way that this being works, the Yellow Jack, is that part of what they do is they show people the truth. And the truth can look a lot of different ways. So if you're working with this being, like in some sort of evolutionary process for yourself, if you have anything that you have hidden from yourself, if you have been self-deceptive about anything ugly about your character, what this being does is takes that and like terrorizes you with it. And it's not necessarily on purpose. It's like to get you to see it. It's like the reason why it's terrorizing is because you're resisting it. And that's part of what the being is showing you. However, there's like some sort of like transmutation or transformation process that goes on even in the individual level with the Yellow Jack, because depending on how you operate with that being, it's sort of like it's showing you potentially an ugly, very ugly truth about yourself. And in that moment, you can accept that truth and change it, or you can just accept that truth and amplify it. And that has typically what's gone on within the macrocosm, at least through history. So it is not the Yellow Jack that is like creating harmful change. The Jack is working with people, and the truth that's in the heart of a large swath of humanity is ugly and harmful. And instead of looking at that and changing it, they've looked at it and decided to act on it and amplify it. And that's what's gone on for the past, I don't even know how long. Well, I do know how long. It's at least World War II that like this particular operation has been attempting to happen. And I just lost hearing in this ear. Because, loath as I am to admit it, Aleister Crowley brought us to a particular point in magical history that is a legitimate point. And so this operation, whatever it is, has been attempting to happen kind of in tandem with his work. And also ever since his death, this has been trying to occur. This is the next step in like at least Western magical history. So I just wanted to acknowledge that person who is bringing up the concern, likely because they care very much and they don't want to see anybody get hurt, I wanted to validate that and also explain it. All right, so what I'm about to talk about now is stuff that just kind of unlocked as I was reading the Secret Cipher of the Euphonauts. Oh, I turned right to it. So as you can see, like at certain points, like obviously I'm highlighting, but then also like certain stuff will just come to me as I'm reading spontaneously, and I just start like writing over stuff like in the book and then put it all together later. So this is probably somewhat like channeled information. So obviously we're kind of like taking it all with a grain of salt, but for now, at least, it is making sense to me in the context of what I've already talked about, and also within the context of source material from the history of Western occultism and magic. So the Yellow Jack, I'm just gonna read this like from my notes now, so I'm sorry if I'm like looking down or whatever, but I wanna like be able to just get it all out. The Yellow Jack is the starting point for a large-scale operation called the Yellow Star, the Star Heliodor, or the Seven Jump. That operation is the continuation of Crowley's work and the final movement of the first phase of Western magic. The number 93 is very important to Thelema. Thelemites and Crowley work with the 93 current, which that's just a particular stream or flavor of like the Tao, like if I'm talking about that. We've been circling around 93 for a while now, but we're not supposed to stay there. The final movement of phase 1 takes us from 93, I said this, 93 to 100, it's technically 101. It's 101. That's the 7 jump. Because what we have to do actively as a people is the 7 jump, and then what actually gets us to 101 is kind of automatic. Like that's something else that does that. We can't go from 93 to 94 and just stay at 94. We have to make it to 100 or get continually knocked back to 93. Every time we fail the 7 jump, something bad happens, and the issue is, while those bad things are human doing, the yellow jack fuels and amplifies those intentions. The yellow jack, I'm saying the yellow jack doesn't care if we make it or not. That's actually not true. I wrote this at a time before I did another reading that will be posted that kind of like clarified more of the yellow jack's intentions. And the yellow jack ultimately is a being of truth. And the truth is not the failure of the 7 jump. Ultimately, because I'm saying like the jack doesn't care if we make it or not. Yes, it does. The yellow jack wants a successful 7 jump. I'm saying it once, but that's a very odd way of talking about like this sort of being wanting something. But this is the yellow jack's purpose, the successful completion of the 7 jump. However, this statement is true of the yellow jack. The yellow jack enjoys both the joy and ecstasy of peace and union of a successful 7 jump and the violence and terror of failure equally. That part is true, though I would say it is weighted more towards the successful completion. But it's not going to... Like, it's almost like, because I'm saying the yellow jack chooses something, and that's not like the correct word. It's like there is someone who I'm saying the yellow jack picks. They're not so much picking as like the person who is going to be like the macrocosm person for the 7 jump, that thing. There's kind of one person that presents themselves. I don't know how that works. And then the jack links up with that person. And then whatever the hell is in that person's heart, that truth, that is the thing that manifests with the help of the yellow jack. But the yellow jack isn't going, oh, I super enjoy what this person wants to manifest. There is something like that I don't understand about the compatibility of the person who acts as like the vessel or operator. I don't understand how that goes down, but it's almost like the jack has no choice in the matter. It has to do whatever it's going to do, and that process tends to come around and around again. And like every time it's come around, we've thus far failed. And so whether I'm talking about the yellow jack or not, this process is coming back around again. It's happening again. And depending on who the yellow jack chooses for that macrocosm operation is the success or failure of the 7 jump. That's what I said. But the jack doesn't make that decision. We do. The jack doesn't make that decision. We do. Or whoever it is that's conducting the attempt at the 7 jump. The most recent attempt involved Trump, and the cult of the yellow jack manifested as Q. This last time we made it through the primus and terminus of the yellow and black jack, but flatlined in the movement of the red jack. In materiality, this manifested as the events of January 6. The movement of the red jack is the scariest and has the potential for the worst violence depending on who's conducting the operation and who's participating in it. The greatest failure of the 7 jump was World War II. The movement of the red jack included the Holocaust. mass human sacrifice to power the nightmare version of whatever the star Heliodor is. So yeah, like depending on who's conducting the operation, that's pretty harmful. Like that is ass. But the thing is, it's not that being, it's us. We're ass. Or like we haven't stepped up, like one of us hasn't stepped up to be like significantly non-ass to work with the Yellow Jack in a productive way. So while I'm validating the person who mentioned the caution, they aren't wrong, I just don't want to place the onus of that on that being. Because like human beings have agency here. We made that collectively. But I will say that it is largely dependent on like that operator. So whoever becomes the conductor or the operator, that's like the scary part, who that person is. And the scariest part about that to me is like, based on what I'm thinking right now, is that someone with really, really good intentions could be selected as the operator. But as you go, you're talking about someone who's dealing with an extreme amount of power and influence. At any point during the 7 jump, whatever that is, they could become corrupted. Like, you could start with someone with good intentions that screws up along the way, and then we still have a failure of a 7 jump and likely some form of like horrible manifestation of violence. Because January 6th and Q and Trump was nowhere near the amount of devastation and violence and horror of like the Holocaust and everything that was going on in Japan and like all of that stuff. It was nowhere near that. So it was less of a failure this time, but still a resounding failure. Some of this I've already kind of discussed, but I'm going to continue reading from my notes here. A new attempt at the 7 jump is beginning. Whether or not I discuss the Yellow Jack and tell you about it, the energy will attempt to coalesce again. The only question is, will we finally go north, or will we continue to go south? Will we make it to 100, or will we descend once more into madness and violence and keep our place at 93? Part of phase 1 of the Mega Happy timeline includes the Yellow Jack selecting that conductor. Depending on the truth of the conductor's heart, what they actually will and not what they say, that will determine the nature of the star Heliodor, whether it succeeds or fails, and the nature of what comes through the gateway it unlocks. What comes through the gateway is the 5th jack, which isn't a jack at all. What comes through the gateway is what gets us to 101. And that can be a positive or a negative 101. And we can have dramatic shifts at any time during the operation. It largely depends on the conductor and how they hold up and perform throughout the entirety of the operation. In my opinion, the reason why we are unable to freely speak with what we're referring to as ultra-terrestrials in this case, why it comes through seemingly in code, isn't because the beings only want to communicate with people who can crack the code. It has to come through that way due to whatever actually happened at the point in time of our collective history known as the Tower of Babel. The construction of whatever the Tower of Babel actually is was a 7 jump. And back then, we all spoke one language. Like a lot of that stuff at that time is very like metaphorical. We don't know what that actually means. So the Tower of Babel is likely like not an actual tower or whatever. We all spoke one language and there was no need for code. Then something interfered. The tower was destroyed, and the results of that 7 jump were so violent, it sundered us all onto all these separate dimensions and timelines. And not only that, but we couldn't communicate directly anymore. We got knocked back several already completed magical phases. And we've all, like, it's been so long that not only have we like relatively forgotten about all of these other beings and everything else, they've also forgotten about us. The final movement of phase 1 of Western magic is to complete the construction of the Tower of Babel. whatever that means, to reunite with our lost communities and reclaim our language and power. Part of that final movement will also be the destruction or imprisonment of whatever or whoever sabotaged us all that first time. Once phase 1 is complete, we don't reset to 0, but that's the 100. But we still have that primary threshold cleared. So instead of starting from 1, we're at 101. So technically, the 7 jump does complete at 100 for us, but we end up at 101 because 100 is too stable. We need the 11 to initiate the magical process of phase 2. So these go to 11. And I had that plotted out, but is it in these notes? I don't know, there's too many notes. So there are 4 jacks, right? There are 4 jacks that are involved in the 7 jump. I'm not gonna name them all now, but right now you know there's a yellow, a black, and a red. And each of those jacks have, hello Dasha, have a, and Misha too. Okay, come on guys. Each of those jacks have a primus and a terminus. That is the movement of each jack. It starts at the primus, ends at the terminus. And the terminus of one jack initiates the primus of the following jack. So I haven't told you about that 4th jack. But here's how it goes symbolically. The yellow jack takes us from 93 to 94. The black jack is 95. The red jack is 96. This other jack is 97. The movement of those 4 jacks, which is 1111, opens up a threshold or a gateway or a stargate, and then that releases the 5th jack. The 5th jack is not a jack. It is 4 other beings. I don't know who they are because the 4 jacks are heralds. They are clowns. They are jesters. And they are the heralds of the beings that come through the gate. Those 4 beings take us from 97 to 101. But technically, we're doing the 7 jump. Because when those 4 beings come through, we don't have to do anything with that. All we're doing is making the gate that the other beings come through. And depending on, like you can have, like let's say like Hitler was actually successful, right? Hitler failed. Can you imagine what that would have looked like had he succeeded? A successful 7 jump under the command and operation of someone like Hitler and the occult mad SS. And it was the same thing again with Trump and Q. Thank God that they had a bigger failure than Hitler did. And what I mean a bigger failure is that they didn't get as far. It wasn't quite as atrocious and horrible and horrific. But if Hitler would have succeeded, it would have been like, we would have made the 7 jump, but it would have been on the fucking blackest of black timelines. So that can happen. That's what made, oh God, I'm so tense about this. But I mean, that's what they obviously don't want. Don't want. And so whoever's operating at this time, we either gotta hope that that person is an abysmal of failure as like Trump or whoever is, or that it's actually someone who can do like a successful 7 jump who is like pro-liberation or positive, like however we would get to the positive 101, right? Like that's not even the mega happy timeline. That's like the total human liberation thing. I have no idea. I'm telling you all this. I have no idea what any of that looks like. Because just success with the star Heliodor seems impossible given the current state of humanity. Like, just to be real with you, though other information has come out in like the read that I'm going to post that's coming after this, because there was some new information. It's technically not a new yellow transmission, and I didn't realize it was going to be connected to the yellow transmissions until after I did the reading, and I went, oh shit, I'm gonna have to make this video before I post that read, because stuff that came out in that read, you have to know about this before we go over there. So it is likely that every time the 7 jump has come around prior to this point, the conductor has had little to no knowledge of the yellow jack, or that this is a massive magical operation. Nonetheless, the show must go on. That's another reason why the red movements have been so terrible and have never reached terminus, because no one's been aware of what's going on. Now some of us are aware, but that doesn't mean the conductor will be, and no one self-determines becoming the conductor. I can't just go, oh, it's me, I'm the conductor. It's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me. That's not how that works. The Yellow Jack chooses the vessel, and it's not really a choice. I'm gonna have to, somebody or me is gonna have to figure out more about how that actually goes down, because as far as I know, we don't have any control over that. So it's just okay. The Yellow Jack chooses the vessel to initiate this round of the operation, and if it fails again and we're not dead, we'll just attempt it again. But as of now, it's happening again. It's happening again. The Yellow Jack has yet to select a conductor. Until that point, all there is understanding the Jack and the Yellow Jack's personal trials, individual trials. Because part of the way that, I would guess a conductor would be selected is by going through the trials of the Yellow Jack. But the thing is, anybody can go through the trials of the Yellow Jack individually, and that doesn't necessarily mean that if they complete those trials that they're going to be the conductor. That's not how that works. Until that point, all there is understanding the Jack and the Yellow Jack's personal trials, because the Yellow Jack works with people on an individual level, even if they're not the primary movers of the macrocosm star Heliodor, and we'll get into that during our next broadcast. So, my traumatized babies and mentally ill Barbies, I am your GM, your eternal game master for this, the most bizarre edition of the Game of Life. I am also, of course, the greatest magician of the age and perhaps the greatest magician of all time. And together, you and I will perform the greatest magic trick of all time. We will reverse the polarities of the world, make America great for once, fly this boat to the moon somehow, shift our world onto the mega happy timeline, making it and leaving it a much better place than perhaps it ever was before. Because we are, my traumatized babies and mentally ill Barbies, crawling on the planet's face. Some insects called the human race, lost in time and lost in space and meaning.